There are moments in long-running public stories when the focus shifts, not because new facts suddenly appear, but because new accusations resurface old tensions. In 2026, the Whittaker family of rural West Virginia is once again at the center of that shift. This time, the language is sharper: scamming, perjury, fraud, exploitation. And now, Patrick's name has re-entered the conversation, not as a helper, not as a visitor, but as a potential figure in a widening dispute about money, government reporting, and responsibility. Before we examine the claims, we need to establish something essential. Allegations are not convictions. Statements made online are not court findings. And repetition does not transform a claim into proof. The Whittakers, long known through viral exposure tied to Mark Leiter, have faced years of scrutiny over how donations were handled, who controlled funds, and whether government benefit rules were followed. Now, new voices claim that investigations were already underway long before Patrick or Eric entered the picture. That is a serious assertion. It suggests that Adult Protective Services or other state entities in West Virginia may have been reviewing the household prior to the arrival of high-profile intermediaries. As of now, there is no publicly released investigative report confirming the full timeline of any such inquiry. But the claim persists, and it centers on three major points: that there were pre-existing government investigations before Patrick or Eric appeared, that false statements were allegedly made to prosecutors regarding money received, that Patrick is being singled out while others who benefited remain unexamined. Let's examine each carefully. First, the investigation timeline. Online commentary now suggests that plans were already in motion to remove certain family members from the home before Patrick or Eric increased their involvement. If true, that would significantly change the narrative that outside visitors triggered state intervention. However, without public documentation, court filings, official removal orders, dated protective service reports, this remains unverified. Government investigations, particularly those involving vulnerable adults, are often confidential, which means the absence of documentation does not disprove the claim, but it also does not confirm it. Second, the accusation of lying to prosecutors. The allegation is that Betty and Larry told authorities Patrick had provided them with nothing, while social media posts allegedly show Patrick giving cash or gifts, including a claim of $2,500 at one point. If that discrepancy exists, it raises a serious legal issue, because knowingly making false statements in an official proceeding can constitute perjury. But again, we must slow down. A Facebook post showing a donation does not automatically establish the legal context of testimony. Were they asked about direct cash? Were they asked about formal transfers? Were they asked about structured payments? Was the question framed around specific dates? Without a transcript of sworn testimony, we cannot conclude perjury occurred. Context determines legality. Third, the broader scamming allegation. The claim now circulating is that Betty and Larry, and possibly others, used social media exposure of vulnerable family members for monetary gain over many years, failing to report income properly to government agencies. If that were true, the legal implications would be significant. Failure to report income while receiving disability benefits can trigger federal or state fraud charges. But as of this writing, no public court database confirms a finalized conviction for long-term systemic benefit fraud against the Whittaker household. Investigations may exist. Charges may be pending, or accusations may be overstated. Until documentation surfaces, we remain in allegation territory. There is another dimension complicating this situation. Patrick reportedly faced legal trouble of his own. The claim now circulating suggests that while Patrick was incarcerated, a member of the Whittaker family allegedly broke into his home. If true, that introduces a retaliatory dynamic. But again, no publicly confirmed court ruling tying that event to the broader financial allegations has been released in consolidated form. What we are seeing is fragmentation, multiple claims, multiple counterclaims, limited documentation, and into that fragmentation enters a new moral argument. If Patrick is being held accountable, should others who profited also be investigated? That question resonates beyond this single family, because the Whittaker story has involved photographers, YouTubers, intermediaries, and supporters who all monetized content in some form. Ad revenue, channel growth, donations, merchandise, exposure-driven sponsorships. If exploitation occurred, where does accountability stop? At the person physically handing over money? At the person uploading the video? At the family members receiving funds? At the platform distributing ads? These are not rhetorical distractions. They are structural questions. Another claim now gaining traction is that unreported income may have angered taxpayers, suggesting public benefits were received while outside donations flowed in parallel. That scenario, if proven, would require formal financial audits. But we must remember something critical. Receiving donations does not automatically equal benefit fraud. The key legal factor is reporting requirements. Were the donations structured? Were they considered gifts? Were they income? Were they under reporting thresholds? Were they directed to third parties? These distinctions matter. Anger is not evidence. There is also a psychological factor at play. Public sympathy for the Whittakers has fluctuated over the years. Early exposure generated compassion. Later controversies generated suspicion. Now, fatigue is visible. Some supporters feel betrayed. Some critics feel validated. Some simply want clarity. But clarity requires documents, not declarations. At this stage in 2026, we have claims of pre-existing investigations, claims of false testimony, claims of unreported money, claims of selective accountability, claims of retaliation. What we do not yet have is a single comprehensive legal resolution tying all these threads together, which means the story is not settled. It is evolving. When allegations shift from internet drama to government intervention, the tone changes. Because once adult protective services, prosecutors, or benefit agencies enter the conversation, the issue stops being about reputation. It becomes about law. The current claim circulating in 2026 is this: that reports had already been filed, that investigations were already underway, that removal plans were already forming, and that the arrival of high-profile visitors, including Patrick and Eric, may have accelerated, but did not originate, state action. To evaluate that claim responsibly, we need to understand how investigations involving vulnerable adults typically function in West Virginia. In cases involving suspected neglect, exploitation, or unsafe living conditions, Adult Protective Services, APS, can open a case based on a neighbor's complaint, a healthcare provider's report, law enforcement referral, anonymous tip, financial institution alert, or documentation shared publicly that raises concerns. That last category matters. Publicly uploaded videos can absolutely trigger investigations. If footage shows potential neglect, unsafe housing, untreated medical conditions, or possible financial exploitation, agencies are obligated to review. The Whittaker family became widely known through content connected to Mark Leiter, whose videos reached millions. That exposure alone could have prompted internal state review, regardless of who visited afterward. But here is the key point. APS investigations are confidential. Even if a case existed before Patrick or Eric arrived, the public would not necessarily know. Case timelines are rarely published unless they result in criminal prosecution or court orders. So the claim that plans were already in motion is plausible in theory. But plausibility is not proof. To remove vulnerable adults from a home, the state generally needs documented evidence of abuse, neglect, exploitation, incapacity combined with unsafe conditions, or inability of caregivers to provide basic needs. Removal is not typically triggered by internet controversy alone. It requires findings. Which raises a second question. What role, if any, did financial scrutiny play? When vulnerable adults receive disability benefits, such as SSI or SSDI, there are reporting requirements for income and resources. Failure to report income above certain thresholds can result in benefit suspension, repayment demands, civil penalties, in severe cases, criminal fraud charges. Now consider the allegations circulating that significant donations were received but not properly reported. If investigators believed unreported income existed, that could trigger parallel reviews by state benefit agencies or federal authorities. But again, we must separate theory from documentation. As of now, there is no publicly released indictment confirming long-term benefit fraud tied directly to the Whittaker household. Investigations may exist. Subpoenas may have been issued. But without filed charges, we remain in a gray zone. There is also a misunderstanding frequently seen online. Not all donations count as income under benefit rules. One-time gifts, funds directed to third parties, in-kind assistance, like groceries or repairs, trust-managed disbursements. Each category has different reporting standards. Without reviewing bank records, benefit filings, and agency correspondence, no outside observer can definitively state whether a violation occurred. Anger does not equal audit. Now let's address the removal of the three, as referenced in online commentary. The claim suggests that 3 vulnerable individuals were removed from care and that the decision may have been part of a longer investigation. Removal typically follows either emergency protective custody due to immediate danger, or court-approved action based on accumulated findings. If the removal was pre-planned, documentation would exist in sealed court records. If it was emergency-based, law enforcement involvement would likely appear in local logs. But unless someone obtains court filings or official statements, speculation fills the void. Another dimension complicates the narrative. When outside visitors frequently enter a vulnerable household, they can unintentionally create evidence. Videos show conditions. Live streams show interactions. Donations show financial flow. Public arguments show instability. All of that becomes part of the record, even if unintentionally. If investigators were already reviewing the household, increased visibility could have provided additional documentation, raised additional complaints, triggered additional mandatory reporting from viewers or professionals, which means Eric or Patrick visiting frequently may not have caused removal, but their presence may have intensified scrutiny. That distinction matters. Cause versus catalyst. There is also a legal concept often misunderstood online: contributory visibility. If someone repeatedly films a household and posts the footage, that footage can later be reviewed in a legal context. If unsafe conditions appear on camera, agencies can cite them. If financial exchanges appear on camera, agencies can question them. Public documentation can both protect and expose. Now consider the allegation that false statements were made to prosecutors about whether Patrick provided financial support. If that claim is accurate, it intersects with benefit investigations in a critical way. Why would someone deny receiving money? One possible explanation, if true, would be fear of benefit repercussions. If cash gifts were received and not reported, acknowledging them under oath could trigger agency review. But we must emphasize, we do not have transcripts. We do not have sworn affidavits. We do not have formal charges for perjury tied to those statements. Without those, the accusation remains an allegation. Another element often overlooked is intent. Benefit fraud requires more than oversight. It requires intentional misrepresentation. For individuals with limited financial literacy, particularly in households with cognitive impairments, reporting errors can occur without criminal intent. That does not excuse non-compliance, but it complicates criminal characterization. Now let's address the claim that Patrick is being selectively targeted. If investigations are underway involving financial matters, agencies typically examine all relevant parties, not just one. But public perception often focuses on the most visible name. Patrick was highly visible during a particular phase of the Whittaker story. Visibility attracts scrutiny. Yet if financial misconduct occurred across multiple actors, including content creators, intermediaries, or family members, accountability would theoretically extend accordingly. The question is whether formal investigations are broad or narrow. As of 2026, no consolidated public case file has emerged outlining a sweeping multi-party fraud indictment tied to the Whittaker fundraising arc. There may be sealed proceedings. There may be ongoing reviews. But without public confirmation, conclusions are premature. We also need to confront something else. Online communities often treat government intervention as vindication. If they were removed, someone must be guilty. But removal decisions are protective, not punitive. They do not automatically assign criminal blame. They address safety. If investigators believed vulnerable adults were not adequately protected, financially or physically, removal could occur without proving fraud. Safety threshold and criminal threshold are different. That distinction is critical. As we stand in 2026, the government angle remains partially obscured. Possible pre-existing investigation? Plausible. Documented timeline? Not public. Benefit reporting concerns? Possible. Filed fraud conviction? Not publicly confirmed. Removal influenced by increased visibility? Potentially. Directly caused by one individual? Unproven. When a name resurfaces in a controversy that never fully settled, the reaction is immediate. Screenshots reappear. Old posts get reposted. Clips get recirculated. Allegations sharpen. In 2026, Patrick's name is back in circulation, not as a background helper, not as a quiet intermediary, but as a central figure in renewed accusations involving money, criminal exposure, and retaliation. Let's slow this down. There are currently 5 separate claims circulating about Patrick: that he provided significant financial support to the Whittaker household, that he was later accused of wrongdoing connected to exploitation, that he was incarcerated at some point, that during his incarceration, a Whittaker family member allegedly broke into his home, that extradition paperwork may now be pending for someone involved. Each of those claims requires independent verification. At present, there is no publicly consolidated court ruling tying all 5 together in a single legal conclusion. But the allegations themselves are shaping perception. First, the money. Archived social media posts reportedly show Patrick delivering donations, including a specific claim of $2,500 handed directly to Betty, who then redistributed it. If those posts are authentic and accurately dated, they complicate any later claim that he gave nothing. But context matters. Was the money personal? Was it donation money raised publicly? Was it reimbursement? Was it assistance in kind? Was it directed to a specific individual rather than the household collectively? Without access to bank records, donation platform data, or sworn testimony transcripts, we cannot determine how that transfer was characterized legally. The difference between gift, charitable support, and controlled funds is not semantic. It determines reporting obligations. Now, let's address the incarceration claim. Online commentary suggests Patrick was locked up at some point during or after his involvement with the Whittakers. If true, public arrest records would exist. But arrest does not equal conviction. And conviction does not automatically relate to Whittaker financial matters. The internet often collapses unrelated legal trouble into narrative confirmation. If he was arrested, he must be guilty of everything. That is not how due process works. If Patrick faced legal issues unrelated to the Whittakers, personal charges, unrelated disputes, they should not be retroactively folded into financial allegations without evidence linking them. Then comes the most volatile claim, that while Patrick was incarcerated, a member of the Whittaker family broke into his home. If accurate, that allegation shifts the moral framing dramatically. It suggests retaliation, or desperation, or conflict escalation. But again, we must separate online assertion from filed charges. Is there a burglary report? Was anyone arrested? Was a warrant issued? Was a case dismissed? Until documentation is reviewed, the claim remains an accusation. Now let's examine the extradition rumor. The statement circulating is that paperwork needs to be signed and that someone will get theirs in May. Extradition is a formal legal process requiring an outstanding warrant, interstate coordination, judicial approval, formal documentation. It is not rumor-driven. If extradition proceedings exist, they would appear in court dockets or law enforcement databases, though sometimes delayed in public access. As of now, no widely publicized, finalized extradition ruling tied directly to the Whittaker financial controversy has been documented in consolidated reporting, which means either the process is ongoing and not yet visible, or the claim is overstated, or the situation is unrelated to the central allegations. Speculation fills silence. Now let's address the broader accusation, exploitation. The claim is that multiple individuals, including Betty, Larry, Patrick, and others, benefited financially from videos featuring vulnerable adults. If exploitation occurred, responsibility would not logically rest on a single person. Content creators monetized views. Intermediaries managed donations. Family members accepted funds. Supporters sent money voluntarily. Exploitation, if legally proven, would require establishing intent, deception, misrepresentation, financial misdirection, or failure to disclose material facts. To date, there is no publicly released court judgment declaring a coordinated exploitation scheme involving all named parties. There are allegations. There is conflict. There are fragmented claims. But there is not yet a unified legal conclusion. Another critical issue is selective accountability. Why is Patrick's name resurfacing so prominently now? Possibilities include: he is more visible. He has prior public statements contradicting current narratives. He has legal vulnerability. Or he is perceived as an easier target than family members with cognitive limitations. It is important not to overlook power dynamics. The Whittaker household includes individuals with documented developmental challenges. Holding them legally accountable requires careful examination of capacity and intent. Patrick, by contrast, is perceived as an outsider with agency and capacity. That difference influences public focus. But fairness demands consistency. If investigators determine that money was mishandled, every party who knowingly participated would need to be examined, not just the most visible one. Now let's discuss retaliation narratives. The claim that Betty and Larry started a vendetta after removal of family members introduces motive into the conversation. Motive matters legally. If false reports were filed intentionally, if warrants were sought under false pretenses, if statements were knowingly misleading, those actions carry legal consequences. But again, we require documentation. Alleging that someone lied on a warrant is not minor. False swearing on a warrant application is a prosecutable offense. If such perjury occurred, there would eventually be a record. Until then, the claim remains unverified. Another dimension to consider is emotional escalation. When financial relationships deteriorate, especially in informal charitable environments, disputes can turn personal. People feel betrayed. People feel used. People feel scapegoated. In those emotional conditions, narratives harden. He scammed them. They lied about him. They set him up. He exploited them. Without evidence, each statement becomes a weapon. What makes this situation uniquely volatile is that vulnerable adults are involved. That raises ethical stakes. The public wants justice, but justice requires evidence. If Patrick engaged in wrongdoing, formal proceedings will determine it. If others misrepresented financial facts, documentation will surface. If government agencies have been investigating quietly, indictments will clarify scope. Until then, what we have is fragmentation. A web of claims without a consolidated verdict. When stories like this unfold, people often treat them as isolated incidents. One family, one intermediary, one alleged scam, one accused helper. But the Whittaker situation, especially with Patrick's name resurfacing, fits a broader pattern that has repeated across the internet for more than a decade. Vulnerability, exposure, monetization, conflict, accusation, and then, eventually, fragmentation. To understand what may be happening now, we have to zoom out. When a vulnerable household becomes viral, three systems collide. The welfare system, the social media economy, and informal charity. Each operates under different rules. The welfare system is structured, bureaucratic, documentation-heavy, and slow. It requires income reporting, resource limits, compliance reviews. The social media economy is fast, emotional, algorithm-driven. It rewards visibility, outrage, sympathy, and narrative arcs. Informal charity sits in between, fueled by goodwill, but often lacking structure, accounting standards, or legal guidance. When those three systems intersect without formal planning, instability is almost guaranteed. Let's break that down in practical terms. If a family receives disability benefits, there are income thresholds and reporting obligations. If a YouTube channel features that family and raises donations, those funds may or may not count as reportable income depending on structure. If an intermediary handles money without establishing a non-profit, trust, or guardianship framework, legal ambiguity increases. And if multiple people monetize content around that family simultaneously, financial lines blur even further. Now add public commentary. When viewers see cash exchanged on video, they assume full transparency. When they see lifestyle improvements, they assume surplus. When they see legal trouble, they assume fraud. But legal definitions operate differently than public perception. Exploitation requires intent and misrepresentation. Fraud requires knowing deception. Failure to report income requires proof of obligation and awareness. Those are not simple standards to meet, especially in informal environments. Now consider the Whittakers specifically. The family first entered widespread public consciousness through content connected to Mark Leiter. That exposure created a sympathetic narrative. Extreme poverty in rural Appalachia, limited education, developmental disabilities, generational hardship neod. That sympathy translated into donations. Then intermediaries appeared. Then more money flowed. Then scrutiny intensified. This arc is not unique to the Whittakers. It is common in viral charity cases. The moment funds increase, suspicion increases. The moment suspicion increases, alliances fracture. The moment alliances fracture, names surface. Patrick's name resurfacing now is part of that cycle. Not necessarily proof of guilt. Not necessarily proof of innocence, but part of a predictable escalation pattern. There is also a deeper psychological dynamic at play. When viewers donate, they form expectations. They expect visible improvement. They expect gratitude. They expect stability. They expect moral clarity. If those expectations are not met, resentment grows. Resentment seeks a target. Often that target becomes the most visible intermediary. But visibility does not automatically equal culpability. At the same time, informal charity without documentation invites risk. If money was exchanged in cash, if receipts were not maintained, if reporting guidance was unclear, if funds were redistributed without formal tracking, then even well-intentioned actors can find themselves facing scrutiny. Ignorance is not always a defense, but complexity is not always crime either. Another factor rarely acknowledged is capacity. When vulnerable adults are involved, legal accountability becomes complicated. Did they understand reporting requirements? Did they knowingly misrepresent funds? Were they guided correctly? Were they advised legally? If intermediaries failed to ensure compliance, responsibility may extend beyond the household. But if intermediaries relied on verbal assurances and informal trust, they may also have misjudged risk. In situations like this, the line between exploitation and chaos can be thin. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Online communities often demand accountability in ways that exceed legal standards. If someone made $1 off them, they should be charged. That sounds morally consistent, but legally, monetizing content that includes consenting adults is not automatically criminal. Exploitation becomes prosecutable when deception, coercion, or fraud is proven. If every person who uploaded a Whittaker-related video were investigated for benefiting financially, enforcement would expand widely. And that is the challenge. Where does responsibility end? At the camera operator? At the donation organizer? At the recipient? At the platform running ads? The law draws narrower lines than public anger does. As of now, no unified public indictment has surfaced naming all parties involved in the Whittaker fundraising era as part of a coordinated scam. If such a case emerges, documentation will clarify scope. If it does not, we may be witnessing a familiar pattern, a messy collapse of informal charity relationships, amplified by online distrust. There is one more layer to consider. When money enters households struggling with addiction or instability, volatility increases. If allegations about drug involvement are true, and we must stress that many such claims remain unproven, then financial chaos can follow without structured oversight. But addiction does not equal organized fraud, and poverty does not equal criminal enterprise. It can equal disorganization, poor judgment, mistrust, defensiveness, all of which can look like malice from the outside. Patrick's resurfacing may represent one of three things: genuine legal accountability in progress, deflection from broader responsibility, or a narrative escalation fueled by unresolved resentment. Without court records, we cannot choose definitively among those options. What we can say is this: years of monetized exposure created a financial ecosystem around the Whittakers. That ecosystem lacked formal infrastructure. When ecosystems lack structure, collapse often produces blame, and blame often lands unevenly. As this situation continues unfolding in 2026, clarity will not come from live-stream declarations or comment threads. It will come from filed charges, court transcripts, financial audits, official rulings. Until then, the responsible position is restraint. Accusations deserve investigation. Names deserve due process. Vulnerable adults deserve protection. And viewers deserve documented truth, not just amplified claims. The Whittaker story has never been simple. And this latest chapter, with Patrick's name surfacing again, is not a clean revelation. It is part of a long-running collision between poverty, publicity, and money. Whether it ends in conviction, exoneration, or continued ambiguity remains to be seen. But one principle remains consistent: allegations are not verdicts. And in situations this complicated, precision matters more than volume. At this point, the question is no longer just whether money was mishandled. It's whether the truth will ever be fully documented. The Whittaker story has stretched across years, from early viral exposure tied to Mark Leiter, to fundraising waves, to internal conflicts, to the resurfacing of Patrick's name in 2026. What remains consistent is this: allegations multiply faster than verified records. Right now, there are claims of unreported donations, claims of false statements, claims of retaliation, claims of selective accountability, claims of government investigations already in motion. But claims are not conclusions. If there was benefit fraud, formal charges will define it. If there was perjury, transcripts will prove it. If there was exploitation, financial audits will outline it. If there was retaliation, court filings will show it. Until then, what we are witnessing is a collision between informal charity and formal law, and that collision rarely resolves quietly. The deeper issue may not be one individual's guilt or innocence. It may be the absence of structure from the beginning. No formal trust, no independent oversight, no transparent accounting released publicly, no long-term compliance planning for benefit reporting. When money flows through informal channels around vulnerable adults in rural West Virginia, near places like Odd, instability becomes almost inevitable. Now Patrick's name sits in the center of renewed scrutiny. Whether that scrutiny results in documented legal action or fades into unresolved accusation will determine how this chapter closes. But one principle remains essential. Accountability must be evidence-based. Responsibility must be evenly applied. And vulnerable people must not become collateral damage in online battles. If wrongdoing occurred, it should be proven in court, not decided in comment sections. And if wrongdoing did not occur, clarity deserves to be just as public as accusation. The story isn't finished. It's waiting on documentation. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.